Have you ever wondered if one of your ancestors fought in the American Revolution? Every year, thousands of people discover they have a Revolutionary War patriot in their family tree, but many more spend years chasing family stories that simply aren't true. So how do you separate fact from fiction? Today, we're going to look at what it really takes to prove Revolutionary War ancestry, the records you'll need, the myths that trip people up, and why the answer isn't always as straightforward as you'd think. If you've ever been told that you have a Revolutionary War ancestor, you're not alone. It's one of the most common family stories in America. Maybe you heard something like, "Grandma always said we're related to George Washington. Our family had a patriot that fought in the Revolution. We had an ancestor that signed something important. We're descended from a famous patriot." Or, "Our family was in the war." The good news is, you don't have to guess anymore. We have records, lots of them. For many people, when they hear the word patriot, they immediately picture someone carrying a musket and fighting on the battlefield. And while thousands of men did exactly that, the reality is much more complicated. Not every patriot fired a gun. In fact, many qualifying patriots never fought in a single battle. The American Revolution wasn't won by soldiers alone. It took an entire population supporting the cause in countless different ways. Of course, there were those who served in the Continental Army or in their local militia. Military service is probably the type of patriotic service most people are familiar with, but others supported the revolution from home. Some individuals supplied food to the troops. Imagine being a farmer who was asked to provide cattle, grain, flour, or other provisions to help feed soldiers in the field. Those contributions could be documented and recognized as patriotic service. Others furnished horses, wagons, or equipment that were needed for transportation or military operations. During the Revolutionary War, those resources was another important form of patriotic service. Men served as justices of the peace, jurors, sheriffs, tax collectors, constables, members of committees of safety, or held other government positions that supported the new American government. Another type of qualifying service involved taking an oath of allegiance or an oath of fidelity to the new government. During the Revolution, loyalty mattered. In some places, formally pledging allegiance to the patriot cause became part of demonstrating support for independence. Depending on the colony or state and the available documentation, other forms of material support, such as paying certain taxes, providing supplies, or performing required public service, may also be evidence of patriotic service. The key is that it must be documented and meet the requirements used to recognize that person's contribution. This is one of the biggest surprises for people beginning their family history journey. They'll often say, "No one in my family fought in the Revolutionary War, so I guess I don't have a patriot ancestor." But that's simply not always true. Your ancestor may have served his community in a completely different way, one that never involved carrying a rifle, but was still essential to the success of the revolution. That's why it's so important to research the records instead of relying on family stories or assumptions. Sometimes the patriot you're looking for wasn't on the battlefield at all. Sometimes he was serving his community, supplying the army, or supporting the cause in ways that history books don't always highlight, but that were every bit as important. One of the biggest misconceptions in genealogy is that there's one magical record that proves everything. That's rarely how it works. Instead, genealogy is like putting together a giant puzzle. Every document is another piece, and sometimes you need dozens of pieces before the picture becomes clear. Let's look at some of the records that can help you prove your Revolutionary War ancestry. Let's start with the records that everyone thinks about first: military records. If your ancestor served during the Revolutionary War, there are several different kinds of military records that may exist. Service records can confirm that someone actually served. Muster rolls were essentially attendance records. They show when a soldier was present with his unit and sometimes where he was stationed. You may also find payroll records showing when soldiers were paid, supply records, or enlistment information. But one of the absolute gold mines for family historians is the pension file. Many Revolutionary War veterans, or later their widows, applied for pensions. These files can be incredible. Depending on the individual, they may include sworn statements describing military service, the names of wives, dates and places of marriage, children's names, places the family lived over several decades, neighbors who testified on their behalf, handwritten letters, and even pages written by the veteran himself. Some pension files are only a few pages. Others are over 100 pages long and contain details you simply won't find anywhere else. Another important record is the bounty land warrant. Instead of cash, some veterans receive land as compensation for their service. Those records can help trace where a family moved after the war and sometimes provide another piece connecting generations. Another record that almost every genealogist uses is the federal census. The very first United States federal census was taken in 1790. There aren't earlier federal censuses because the federal government simply hadn't started conducting them yet. The census was intended to count the population after the Constitution was ratified. Now, it's important to understand one limitation. The early censuses don't list every person's name. For example, the 1790 census usually names only the head of household and places everyone else into age and gender categories. That means you might see one male over 16, 3 males under 16, and 4 females, but no names for anyone except the head of household. As the decades go on, the census becomes much more detailed, especially beginning in 1850 when every free member of the household is listed by name. Census records are fantastic for tracking a family over time. They can show where someone lived, how old they were, who lived in the household, occupations, property values, and sometimes even neighbors who turn out to be relatives. But here's something many beginners don't realize. A census alone usually cannot prove someone was a Revolutionary War patriot. Instead, it helps build the timeline that supports your overall case. Wills are some of my favorite records because they're often very direct. When someone wrote a will, they usually wanted there to be no confusion about who inherited their property. That means they'll often name their wife, their sons, their daughters, sometimes their grandchildren, and occasionally even brothers, sisters, nieces, nephews, or other relatives. A will might read something like, "Leave my farm to my son John, 1 cow to my daughter Mary, and the remainder of my estate to my beloved wife Sarah." Just one document like that can connect multiple generations of a family. If you're trying to prove that John Smith was the son of William Smith, a will may do exactly that. One record that beginners often overlook is land deed. People tend to think deeds are only about buying and selling property. They're much more valuable than that. Land stayed in families for generations. A father might sell land to his son for $1, which wasn't really a sale, it was essentially a legal way of transferring property. Deeds may mention spouses who had to release their rights to the land. They may identify neighboring property owners, who often turn out to be relatives. Sometimes you'll see phrases like heirs of, son of, or references to inherited property. Land records can also help you trace migration. If someone suddenly disappears from one county but appears buying land in another, you've just found a clue about where the family moved. Those kinds of clues are incredibly valuable. Before governments kept birth and death certificates, churches often kept the best records available. Many churches recorded baptisms, marriages, burials, confirmations, and membership lists. These records can fill in the gaps when civil records simply don't exist. A baptism record might identify both parents. A marriage record can name witnesses who were family members. Burial records may identify relatives buried in the same churchyard. Even membership rolls can help place a family in a specific community during a certain period. When you're researching families before the mid-1800s, church records can be some of the most valuable documents you'll ever find. So as you can see, proving Revolutionary War ancestry usually isn't about finding one perfect document. It's about combining military records, census records, wills, land deeds, probate files, church records, and many other sources until the evidence tells a consistent story. That's exactly why experienced genealogists say, "We don't collect names, we collect evidence." Now let's talk about one of the biggest game changers in genealogy over the last couple of decades, DNA testing. There is no question about it. DNA has revolutionized family history research. Millions of people have discovered unknown relatives, solved long-standing family mysteries, broken through brick walls, and even identified biological parents and grandparents because of DNA. It's an incredible tool, but it's important to understand what DNA can and can't do. One of the biggest misconceptions I hear is, if I take a DNA test, it'll tell me which Revolutionary War patriot I'm descended from. Unfortunately, that's not how it works. Your DNA test isn't going to come back with a message saying, "Congratulations, you're the great-great-great-great-great-grandchild of Captain John Smith who fought at Yorktown." DNA simply doesn't work that way. What DNA can do is confirm that you're biologically related to other people. It can identify cousins you didn't know you had, connect you with branches of your family tree, and point you toward families or locations you may never have considered researching. Sometimes those DNA matches provide exactly the clue you need to solve a mystery that's been sitting unsolved for years. Think of DNA as another piece of evidence, not the entire case. DNA strengthens your research. It can support your conclusions, help confirm family connections, and sometimes point you in the right direction when you're stuck. But documentation is still the foundation. The strongest genealogy isn't built on DNA alone, and it isn't built on family stories alone. It's built by combining DNA with solid documentary evidence until the entire story fits together. That's how genealogists turn clues into proof. So you may be wondering, if you're just getting started on researching to see if you have a Patriot in your line, where do you begin? The answer is simple. Start with yourself, then your parents, then your grandparents, then your great-grandparents. Never skip generations. Document everything before moving backwards. One of the things I love most about genealogy isn't finding the famous names. It's discovering the ordinary people that built our families and communities. Every document tells part of their story. And every generation you uncover brings you one step closer to understanding where you came from. Whether you eventually find a Revolutionary War patriot or not, the journey itself is worth taking because every family has a story waiting to be found. So now I have a question for you. What's the oldest ancestor you've been able to find? Or if you're new to family research, what do you hope to discover in your family tree? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time on Finding Kinfolk.